The Vatican sits on 121 acres, smaller than most golf courses, no army, no oil fields, no manufacturing base, no tech sector. And yet, this microstate controls assets worth between $10 and $15 billion in identifiable holdings. The art collection alone defies valuation. Some estimates place it above $50 billion. Most people believe the church accumulated this fortune through donations, faithful believers giving their coins to God. Faith built the wealth, generosity sustained it. The donations were a fraction of the story. The Vatican's wealth did not grow from charity. It grew from a 1,700-year financial engineering project involving land monopolies, taxation systems, banking innovations, and a single 1929 deal converting political defeat into liquid capital. Faith was the product. Land was the business model. The distinction matters. Religious institutions collect donations. Financial empires control flow. The Vatican controlled flow. For centuries, the church positioned itself at the bottleneck of European spiritual life. Salvation required the church. Salvation required payment. The infrastructure of medieval Christianity created extraction systems operating through every parish in the Western world. Tithes flowed upward. Land grants accumulated. Banking partnerships multiplied investment returns. The structural machinery the Vatican engineered between the 4th and 20th centuries created a model modern sovereign wealth funds now replicate. Norway's government pension fund, Abu Dhabi Investment Authority, Singapore's GIC. These institutions study Vatican financial history, not for religious reasons, for institutional survival reasons. Welcome to Noob Historian. Behind every headline in your history book, there's a ledger they kept hidden. We open it. The Vatican's financial architecture touches your life in ways you have never considered. Tax exemptions for religious institutions in the United States shelter an estimated $1.2 trillion in assets from public revenue. The legal frameworks protecting nonprofit religious wealth trace directly to precedents the Vatican established in negotiations with secular governments over 17 centuries. When your local church pays no property tax, when televangelists accumulate private jets under religious organization status, when debates erupt over taxing religious institutions, those debates echo arguments first settled between popes and emperors in late antiquity. The Vatican wrote the playbook. Everyone else adapted it. Today, we trace 100 years of financial history. We follow the land grants. We track the taxation networks. We examine the banking relationships. We analyze the single deal converting territorial loss into modern investment capital. This is the story of how a persecuted religious minority became history's wealthiest institution. In 313 CE, Emperor Constantine issued the Edict of Milan. Christianity became legal throughout the Roman Empire. Within 12 years, the transformation of church finances began. Constantine did not give the church money. He gave the church something better, land. The Liber Pontificalis, the official chronicle of the early popes compiled between the 6th and 9th centuries, records Constantine's grants in specific detail. The Lateran Palace became papal property. Agricultural estates across Italy transferred to church control. Landholdings in North Africa generated annual grain revenues. Constantine assigned specific gold revenues to Roman basilicas for maintenance and operation. The chronicle lists properties by name and location. This was not vague generosity. This was systematic asset transfer. The 4th century church recognized a principle. Modern institutional investors confirm daily, land outlasts currencies. Roman coins would debase. Governments would collapse. Wars would destroy portable wealth. But agricultural land in Italy continued producing crops. Rental properties in Rome continued generating income. Land held value through monetary collapses, political transitions, and economic catastrophes. Constantine's gift established the church as a major landholder. The incentives created by this initial transfer shaped everything to follow. When you own land, you think in generations. When you think in generations, you build institutions designed for centuries. The Vatican's financial planning horizon exceeded every other entity in the Western world. Emperors planned for reigns, dynasties planned for family lines, the church planned for eternity. This created an advantage no competitor matched. A merchant house might survive 3 generations before family disputes fragmented holdings. A royal dynasty might persist for 2 centuries before conquest or civil war ended the line. The church operated on a different timeline. The institution had no mortality date. Planning for 500 years became feasible. The grants continued after Constantine. His successors maintained imperial support for church landholding. Wealthy Roman families began donating estates to guarantee prayers for their souls. Death became a revenue event. The mechanics of this transfer deserve attention. A Roman aristocrat facing mortality wanted assurance of favorable treatment in the afterlife. The church offered prayers for the deceased. These prayers required compensation. Land transfers provided compensation lasting beyond any single payment. The family lost the estate. The church gained permanent income. Multiply this transaction across thousands of wealthy families over several centuries. The accumulation becomes staggering. By the late 5th century, the Church owned substantial agricultural territory across the former Western Roman Empire. When Rome fell in 476, the Church held assets generating continuous income regardless of political authority. The infrastructure for extraction was already operational. Tenant farmers paid rents, the states produced crops for sale. Income flowed to Rome. Germanic kings replaced Roman emperors. The Church's landholdings remained intact. The Church also controlled something beyond physical property: legitimacy. As the Roman state collapsed in the West, the Church remained the only functioning administrative network covering former imperial territory. Bishops served as civil administrators in cities lacking secular government. Monasteries preserved literacy in an age of declining education. Papal authority provided the single recognized legitimacy source across fragmented kingdoms. This created leverage. When Frankish kings wanted legitimacy, they negotiated with the Pope. When Lombard rulers sought recognition, they looked to Rome. When Italian territories needed arbitration, they turned to papal authority. The Church converted spiritual authority into political leverage. Political leverage converted into financial concessions. Land grants expanded. Tax exemptions accumulated. Legal privileges multiplied. The structural position strengthened with each passing decade. The gatekeepers of salvation became the gatekeepers of political legitimacy. Both gates charged tolls. By the 8th century, the Church had moved beyond land-based income to systematic taxation of the faithful. Peter's pence began in England around 787 CE, spreading across Christian Europe over subsequent centuries. Each household owed an annual payment to Rome. The amounts were small per family, 1 penny, a seemingly trivial sum. The aggregate was enormous. Millions of households paying annual tribute created revenue streams no medieval king matched. The concentration of these small payments produced enormous sums at the center of the system. The Church built collection infrastructure, reaching every parish. Local priests gathered payments. Diocesan administration consolidated funds. National hierarchies forwarded revenues. Rome received the concentrated flow. Modern tax authorities use the same principle. Small amounts from many payers generate massive totals. The Church invented this system for religious purposes 1,000 years before nation-states adopted it for secular taxation. Your government learned taxation mechanics from the Church, not the other way around. The efficiency of this system deserves recognition. The Church faced the same administrative challenges modern tax authorities face. How do you collect small amounts from millions of dispersed individuals across vast territories without spending more on collection than you receive in revenue? The answer was infrastructure. Parish priests already interacted with every family for religious purposes. Adding tax collection to their duties required minimal additional cost. The spiritual infrastructure doubled as financial infrastructure. Baptisms, marriages, and funerals provided occasions for payment collection. In 756, the Frankish king Pepin the Short granted the Pope territorial sovereignty over central Italy. The donation of Pepin created the Papal States, a political entity controlling territory from Rome to Ravenna. The Pope became a temporal ruler. The Vatican became a government. Governments collect taxes. The Papal States collected taxes. Agricultural levies, commercial duties, administrative fees, and judicial fines all flowed to papal coffers. The Church now controlled both spiritual revenue from the faithful worldwide and territorial revenue from subjects in central Italy. This dual revenue structure persisted for over 1,000 years. The Papal States expanded and contracted through medieval centuries. At maximum extent, papal territory included much of central Italy, from Bologna in the north to Benevento in the south. Revenue from these lands provided primary funding for papal administration, diplomatic missions, and military operations. The Church also operated courts. Ecclesiastical law covered marriage, inheritance, and numerous commercial matters. Court fees and fines generated additional income. The legal infrastructure created extraction opportunities beyond taxation. The medieval Church monetized doctrine itself through the indulgence system. Indulgences offered remission of temporal punishment for sins. The theological mechanics were complex, but the financial mechanics were simple. The faithful purchased spiritual relief. Initially, indulgences connected to specific acts of piety. A pilgrimage to Rome earned an indulgence. A donation to a crusade earned an indulgence. Over time, the system commercialized. By the 15th century, professional indulgence preachers traveled Europe selling salvation. Johann Tetzel's famous sales pitch summarized the proposition. As soon as the coin in the coffer rings, the soul from purgatory springs. The income from indulgences funded specific projects. The construction of St. Peter's Basilica in Rome received substantial indulgence revenue. The faithful across Europe paid for the largest church in Christendom through these purchases. This system eventually triggered the Reformation. Martin Luther's 1517 protest began with objections to indulgence sales. The financial machinery of the Church generated its most serious challenge in a millennium. But the structural position of the medieval Church had already created multiple extraction points beyond indulgences. Birth required baptism, marriage required church blessing, Death required last rites. Every significant life transition passed through church infrastructure. The church controlled spiritual bottlenecks across the entire human life cycle. Each bottleneck became a revenue point: fees for sacraments, donations for prayers, payments for church services. The infrastructure of Christian life became extraction machinery. The flow of medieval European wealth toward Rome had no parallel in scale. No king controlled comparable revenue streams. No merchant network generated comparable income. The church's structural position created income concentration beyond any secular competitor, and the pressure points extended further. Excommunication removed individuals from salvation. Interdict removed entire territories from church services. These spiritual weapons had financial consequences. An excommunicated merchant lost business partners unwilling to risk association. An interdicted kingdom faced social chaos as baptisms, marriages, and burials stopped. The threat of these sanctions created negotiating leverage. Kings paid to avoid interdict. Nobles paid to lift excommunication. The machinery of spiritual authority converted directly into financial flows. The 15th century brought a transformation in Vatican finances. The Church partnered with the most sophisticated bankers in Europe. The Medici family of Florence became papal bankers. This partnership reshaped everything. The Medici operated the largest banking network in Europe. Their branches spanned the continent from London to Constantinople. They understood international finance better than any contemporary institution. The partnership began in 1410, when the Medici Bank became one of several papal depositories. By 1440, the relationship had deepened. The Medici managed papal revenues across Europe. The mechanics were complex. Peter's pence collected in England needed to reach Rome. Physical transport of coins across hundreds of miles invited robbery. The Medici solved this problem. They collected revenues in England through their London branch. They credited the papal account in Rome through their Italian operations. No physical transport required. The letters of credit system reduced risk and increased efficiency. The Medici also financed papal operations. Construction projects required upfront capital. Military campaigns needed immediate funding. The Medici provided loans secured against future church revenues. The partnership delivered mutual benefits. The Medici gained papal favor and church business. 2 Medici family members became popes, Leo X and Clement VII. The family accumulated political leverage alongside financial returns. The church gained access to sophisticated financial operations. Revenue collection improved. Capital management advanced. Investment returns multiplied. The Vatican-Medici relationship introduced financial innovations to church operations beyond letters of credit. Church revenues in distant lands converted to banking instruments transferable across Europe. The risk of robbery during transport disappeared. Transaction efficiency increased dramatically. The church also began systematic lending. Surplus funds generated interest income. Vatican capital entered commercial circulation. Religious revenue produced financial returns. This represented a structural transformation. The church moved from passive receipt of income to active management of capital. Land still generated revenue. Taxes still flowed to Rome. But financial operations now multiplied returns on existing assets. Renaissance popes accumulated art with systematic intent. Papal patronage of artists served multiple purposes. Religious imagery communicated doctrine to illiterate populations. Magnificent churches demonstrated papal authority and attracted pilgrims. Beauty served both spiritual and political functions. But the artwork itself accumulated as asset: the Sistine Chapel ceiling, Raphael's Vatican rooms, Michelangelo's Pietà. Each commission represented both expenditure and investment. The Vatican's art collection began growing toward its current incalculable value. Consider the economics. Michelangelo received 3,000 ducats for the Sistine Chapel ceiling, painted between 1508 and 1512. This represented substantial payment for the time. Today, the ceiling is priceless. No buyer exists at any price. The Vatican would never sell. Modern museums would pay fortunes for single pieces in the Vatican collection. The Vatican holds thousands. The collection continued growing through subsequent centuries. War spoils, diplomatic gifts, purchases, bequests. Each edition increased the total. The Vatican also entered political finance during the Renaissance. Popes lent to kings. Church capital supported military campaigns the Vatican favored. Loans came with conditions. Repayment involved concessions. The flow of money created political obligations. Debtor kings became compliant kings. Financial relationships extended papal influence beyond spiritual authority into secular politics. The machinery of medieval church power now included banking infrastructure. Income, investment, lending, and political finance created an integrated system. The Vatican operated as both religious institution and financial conglomerate. The concentration of European wealth in Rome during this period funded the artistic explosion we now call the Renaissance. The Vatican's financial position made it the largest patron of arts in the Western world. The masterpieces tourists admire today represent the material expression of concentrated financial flows. The Papal States ended in 1870. Italian unification absorbed papal territory. Rome became the capital of a unified Italy. The Pope lost temporal sovereignty he had exercised since the 8th century. Pope Pius IX refused to recognize the Italian state. He declared himself a prisoner in the Vatican, unable to leave without acknowledging Italian authority over Rome. His successors maintained this position for 59 years. The Church lost territorial revenue immediately. Agricultural taxes, commercial duties, and administrative fees from the Papal States disappeared overnight. The Vatican faced a genuine financial crisis. The annual revenue from the Papal States had funded Vatican operations for centuries. The administrative structure, diplomatic corps, missionary activities, and charitable operations all depended on this income. Alternative funding required rapid development. Pope Leo III, reigning from 1878 to 1903, reorganized Vatican finances for the post-territorial era. Archived correspondence from the Vatican's Apostolic Archive documents this transformation. Leo III established modern accounting practices previously absent from papal administration. He diversified investments into international securities rather than relying on Italian assets. He created administrative structures still operating today. Peter's pence became more important than at any previous point in history. Without territorial revenue, donations from the faithful provided essential income. The Church mobilized global Catholic communities for financial support. The appeal succeeded. Catholics worldwide contributed to support the Pope they viewed as imprisoned by the Italian state. The political narrative enhanced donation rates. Leo III also invested in non-Italian assets. The Vatican reduced exposure to Italian political risk. International diversification protected against local economic instability or governmental seizure. French bonds, British securities, American investments. The Vatican portfolio expanded beyond Europe. The Church became a global investor. These reforms built the foundation for modern Vatican finance. The loss of territory forced modernization. The Church adapted to change circumstances with a reorganization previous centuries of stability had rendered unnecessary. The Roman question persisted for decades. The Vatican refused to recognize Italy. Italy refused to acknowledge Vatican claims to Rome. The impasse blocked diplomatic relations between the Church and the Italian state occupying its former capital. On February 11, 1929, the Vatican and Mussolini's Italian government signed the Lateran Accords. 3 documents resolved the 60-year standoff. The treaty recognized Vatican City as an independent sovereign state. The 121-acre territory gained the same international legal status as any nation. The Pope was no longer a prisoner. He ruled a recognized country. The Concordat regulated church-state relations in Italy. Catholicism became the state religion. Religious instruction entered public schools. Church marriages gained civil recognition. The Church received legal privileges throughout Italy. The Financial Convention provided compensation. Italy paid 750 million Italian lire in cash. Italy provided 1 billion lire in 5% interest-bearing government bonds. The total payment equaled approximately 85 million 1929 US dollars. In today's currency, this approaches $1.3 billion. This payment compensated for the Papal States' territorial losses in 1870. The Vatican converted 59 years of grievance into liquid capital. The settlement represented a transformation in Vatican finances comparable to Constantine's original land grants. The Lateran payment created something the Vatican had never possessed in this form, a massive pool of investable cash. Territorial revenue required territorial control. Land grants required physical possession, but liquid capital created options. The Vatican could invest anywhere, any industry, any country, any asset class. The Church had operated financial systems for centuries. Now it possessed capital designed specifically for investment returns, free from the administrative burdens of territorial governance. The 1929 settlement marks the birth of the modern Vatican as a financial institution in the contemporary sense. The machinery of wealth management replaced the machinery of territorial extraction. The Vatican pivoted from landlord to investor. The timing proved fortunate. The settlement preceded the October 1929 stock market crash by 8 months. The Vatican received payment and converted it to diversified holdings before the worst of the Great Depression struck. Bernardino Nogara, a financial professional with international banking experience, managed the Vatican's new investment portfolio. His strategy emphasized real estate, gold, and equity stakes in Italian companies. The portfolio grew despite the global economic crisis. By 1935, the original Lateran payment had multiplied substantially. Nogara's management converted compensation for past losses into an engine for future growth. In 1942, Pope Pius XIII established the Istituto per le Opere di Religione, the IOR, the Vatican Bank. The founding charter created an institution to manage works of religion. In practice, the IOR became a full-service bank. It accepted deposits. It managed investments. It transferred funds internationally. The Vatican Bank operated outside normal banking regulation. Sovereign immunity protected Vatican institutions from Italian law. Banking secrecy protected depositor identities. The IOR occupied a unique regulatory position no other financial institution matched. This position created both opportunity and controversy. The IOR served Vatican administrative needs. It paid salaries to church employees. It transferred funds to missions worldwide. It managed investments for religious orders. These functions required banking infrastructure. But the IOR also served external depositors. Italian citizens and businesses placed funds in Vatican accounts beyond Italian regulatory reach. The bank became a vehicle for capital flight. In 1982, Roberto Calvi died hanging under Blackfriars Bridge in London. His pockets contained bricks and approximately $15,000 in various currencies. Calvi ran Banco Ambrosiano, an Italian bank with deep Vatican connections. The bank had collapsed, owing $1.4 billion. Italian parliamentary investigations from 1981 to 1984 examined IOR involvement. The investigations revealed complex financial relationships between the Vatican Bank and Ambrosiano. The IOR had provided letters of patronage for Ambrosiano subsidiaries. These letters appeared to guarantee Vatican backing for Ambrosiano obligations. When Ambrosiano collapsed, creditors looked to the Vatican for compensation. The connections went deeper. Archbishop Paul Marcinkus, head of the IOR, sat on the board of Ambrosiano's Bahamian subsidiary. The Vatican Bank owned shares in Ambrosiano-controlled companies. The relationships created legal exposure. The Vatican eventually paid $244 million to Ambrosiano creditors. The payment came without admission of legal liability. Vatican officials described it as a voluntary contribution to end the dispute. Others viewed it as settlement of financial obligations. The scandal exposed the risks of Vatican banking opacity. Regulatory immunity created space for questionable operations. The financial machinery required reform, but reform came slowly. The IOR continued operating with minimal external oversight for 3 more decades. Additional controversies emerged. Italian prosecutors investigated money laundering allegations. European regulators expressed concerns. The Vatican's financial reputation suffered recurring damage. Pope Francis initiated substantial financial reforms after his 2013 election. Moneyval, the Council of Europe's anti-money laundering body, conducted Vatican evaluations beginning in 2012. The results identified deficiencies in Vatican financial oversight. The Vatican adopted international financial standards in response. External auditors gained access to Vatican accounts. Anti-money laundering procedures entered IOR operations. Suspicious transaction reporting began. The bank started rejecting accounts, lacking proper documentation. The administration of the Patrimony of the Apostolic See, known as APSA, manages Vatican real estate and investments. Recent reforms brought APSA under greater oversight. Financial reporting improved, transparency increased. These changes reflect global institutional demands. Modern asset holders face environmental, social, and governance requirements. Transparency expectations reach all significant financial institutions. Sovereign wealth funds, university endowments, and pension systems all operate under oversight frameworks. The Vatican adapted to contemporary standards after decades of exemption. The Vatican's identifiable financial assets total between $10 and $15 billion. The Vatican Bank manages approximately $5 billion in assets. APSA controls substantial additional holdings in real estate and investments. Real estate forms a major component of Vatican wealth. The Vatican owns an estimated 5,000 properties in Rome alone. The holdings include apartment buildings, commercial properties, and historic palaces. Additional real estate exists in London, Paris, Geneva, and other major cities. Some estimates value Vatican real estate at $4 billion or more. The properties generate rental income. The land appreciates over time. The real estate strategy. Constantine's gifts initiated continues operating 17 centuries later. The art collection defies standard valuation. The Vatican museums hold works by Michelangelo, Raphael, Leonardo, Caravaggio, Bernini, and countless other masters. The Sistine Chapel alone contains priceless masterpieces. The Raphael rooms, the Pietà, the Laocoon. These pieces never enter the market. No sales establish prices. Valuation remains speculative. Some estimates exceed $50 billion for the collection. Others suggest even this figure understates reality. The art generates income indirectly. The Vatican museums attract 6 million visitors annually. Admission fees produce revenue. The art collection drives tourism income throughout Rome. But direct sale of major works remains unthinkable. Add the gold reserves held in Vatican vaults. Add the precious liturgical objects accumulated over centuries. Add the historical artifacts, manuscripts, and rare books. The total Vatican wealth remains partially incalculable. Standard accounting fails to capture assets of this nature in history. The Vatican's 1,700-year financial trajectory contains lessons extending far beyond religious history. Tax-exempt status debates in your country trace to precedents the Vatican established. When American politicians argue about taxing religious institutions, they engage a debate first conducted between popes and emperors in late antiquity. The legal frameworks protecting religious organization assets derive from centuries of church-state negotiation. The $1.2 trillion sheltered in American religious organization assets exists because of legal frameworks Vatican negotiations created over centuries. When you pay property taxes and your local church does not, the exemption traces to ancient precedent. When televangelists accumulate wealth under religious nonprofit status, they operate within systems the Vatican pioneered. Institutional investment strategies your pension fund uses originate from principles the Vatican pioneered. Land as foundation of permanent wealth, diversification across borders and asset classes, multi-generational planning horizons, patient capital accumulation. The endowment model guiding university investments descends from church financial practices. Harvard and Yale study the same institutional longevity principles the Vatican demonstrated. Multi-century wealth preservation requires multi-century thinking. The church provided the model. Sovereign wealth fund structures mirror the Vatican's 1929 pivot. Norway converted oil revenue into diversified global investments. Abu Dhabi converted energy wealth into permanent capital. The Vatican converted territorial loss into investment portfolio. The conversion logic remains identical across all cases. Modern ESG requirements and transparency standards now applied to all major institutional investors reached the Vatican last. The Church's regulatory exemptions persisted longer than any comparable entity. The gradual application of standard oversight to Vatican finances demonstrates the persistence of institutional resistance to transparency. Your own pension fund, bank, or government investment authority operates under rules the Vatican avoided for decades. The Vatican's path to institutional wealth followed identifiable steps. Step 1. Convert political favor into permanent assets. Constantine's land grants established a foundation outlasting political changes. Asset ownership created independence from any single patron or political arrangement. Step 2. Control structural bottlenecks. Medieval Catholic life required church services at every life stage. Each requirement created extraction opportunity. Structural position enabled systematic revenue collection. Step 3. Build taxation infrastructure. Peter's pence reached every household in Catholic Europe. Small payments from millions of payers generated enormous aggregate income. The administrative network already existed for religious purposes. Step 4. Partner with financial experts. The Medici relationship brought banking sophistication to church operations. Revenue collection evolved into capital management. Step 5. Convert loss into opportunity. The 1929 Lateran Settlement transformed territorial defeat into liquid investment capital. Crisis became pivot point for institutional transformation. Step 6. Maintain regulatory independence. Sovereign status protected Vatican finances from standard oversight for decades. Exemption persisted until external pressure forced adaptation. This playbook works. The Vatican survived monetary collapses, wars, revolutions, and political transformations across 17 centuries. No other institution matches this financial longevity. No other entity has maintained continuous operation and asset accumulation through comparable historical disruption. Modern family offices study Vatican history explicitly. Multi-generational wealth preservation requires multi-generational thinking. The Church thought in centuries. The results speak for themselves. The Vatican's wealth continues evolving. Pope Francis pushes transparency reforms. Financial scandals prompt structural changes. Global oversight standards tighten around all major financial institutions. Yet the fundamental position remains strong. The real estate endures. The art collection appreciates. The investment portfolio generates returns. The tax exemptions persist in countries worldwide. The donation infrastructure continues operating. The 1,700-year project continues. The machinery still operates. The flow still moves toward Rome. You now understand the documented history behind the Vatican's financial position. You recognize the mechanisms converting religious authority into institutional wealth. You see the system's modern entities replicate and the playbook still in operation. The Vatican did not become rich through prayer. It became rich through land, taxation, banking, and investment. Faith was the product. Finance was the method. The structure persists. The ledger is now open.